Snow had a way of swallowing sound in Red Hollow, but that morning it couldn't quiet the roar of a town hungry for cruelty. Ilara Quinn's breath came out in bursts of white against the winter air as she sat tied to the wooden chair in the center of the square. Her fingers bound behind her had gone so numb she couldn't tell where her skin ended and the frost began. Her ankles were cinched to the chair legs with rough rope that bit through wool and flesh. A plank hung above her head, with black paint smeared in jagged strokes, thief. Someone in the crowd tossed a chunk of frozen dirt. It struck her cheek and cracked apart like brittle bone. Laughter followed. "That ain't a girl sitting there," a man on the store porch jeered. "That's hunger with a face." The line sliced deeper than the rope. Ilara lowered her chin, wishing the earth would swallow her whole. She wasn't crying. The cold had stolen even that. Mayor Amos Reddick stepped forward, his fur-lined coat brushing the snow. He raised a coiled whip so the winter light bounced off the oiled leather. He liked moments like this when the whole town watched him play God. "Red Hollow won't feed a thief," he declared, "especially not one who steals from our winter stores." Ilara's lips were cracked and swollen. It was refuse, tossed out. Reddick barked a laugh. "Hear that? She calls our larder refuse." The crowd murmured like a hive. A piece of rotten apple flew striking the leg of the chair. The cold gnawed at Ilara's bones. She tried not to shiver. Shivering made them laugh more. 3 days and nights Reddick went on no water, no food. Let her feel what she steals. A drunk lurched from the circle, yanking at the shawl around Ilara's neck. She jerked back rope, burning her wrists. The crowd howled, scenting blood like wolves after a long famine. "Strip her bare," the man slurred. "Then we'll see how sorry she—" The crack that split the morning wasn't his voice. It was a whip one that wasn't in Reddick's hand. The drunk howled as a massive shadow stepped behind the chair, grabbing the man's wrist and wrenching it back until something popped. Gasps spread through the crowd. The stranger stood tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a wolf-gray coat crusted with snow. His dark beard was wet and wild, and his eyes, flat steel gray, looked like they'd stared down winters harsher than any storm. Ilara barely knew his name, but Red Hollow whispered it like a rumor or a warning. "Calder Rourke." "That's enough," he said, voice low and cold as creek ice. "You want justice, then start with truth. Who saw her steal?" Silence rolled out across the square. Reddick stiffened. "Red Hollow doesn't answer to mountain strays." "Untie her," Calder said calmly, "and charge her proper. Or untie her and let her go. But you won't lay a hand on her." Reddick snapped his fingers, and 3 men moved forward. But Calder moved first, faster than a winter gust. 2 quick strokes of his hunting knife, and the ropes fell from Ilara's wrists. She gasped as blood rushed back into her hands, pain exploding like pins of fire. Calder shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders, dimming the jeers behind a wall of wool and warmth. "Stand if you can," he murmured. Voice meant for her alone. "I'll get you out of here." Ilara tried. Her legs trembled violently, and her vision swam. Calder slid a steady hand under her elbow, holding her upright when her knees threatened to fold. Behind them, the crowd hesitated. The hunger for cruelty flickered uncertain. Reddick, Calder said without turning, "Fetch your judge. Hold a trial, or admit you don't want truth, only blood." A ripple of unease traveled through the onlookers. Reddick's jaw twitched. "Take her then," he spat. "But she sets foot in Red Hollow again, I'll see her buried." Calder didn't bother answering. He simply guided Ilara forward through the parting crowd. Snow hissed along the packed dirt like 1,000 small insults. By the time they reached the alley behind the mercantile, the shouts behind them had already dulled into a bitter hum. Ilara leaned heavily on him, fighting dizziness. Calder crouched beside her. "Let me see your wrists." She hesitated, but he waited. His hands, despite their size, were careful as he lifted her sleeves. The rope burns were raw and deep. He tore strips from the lining of his pocket, dipped them in melted snow carried in a tin, and wrapped them with slow, methodical precision. "You didn't have to," she whispered. He didn't look up. "I remember what a crowd becomes when it stops being neighbors." Snowflakes clung to his hair. His voice carried a quiet gravity that made her chest tighten. "Why?" Her throat ached. "Why did you stop for me?" He paused, just for a beat. "Because a man with a whip doesn't always know where he's truly aiming." Before she could ask what that meant, distant shouting rose from the square. Reddick's voice barking orders. Calder stiffened. "They're coming." He hoisted her gently to her feet. "We're not safe in town." Her pulse hammered. Where will we go? Up the ridge?" "My cabin." He met her eyes. "You'll live if we move now." Ilara swallowed hard, her limbs trembling. She wanted warmth, rest, anything but running. But the look on his face held no room for doubt. Can I walk?" "You can try," he said, "but I'll keep you standing." He led her toward the stable behind the mercantile. A big, dun-colored horse lifted its head as they entered, breath steaming in the cold. Calder lifted Ilara as though she weighed nothing and settled her onto a folded blanket over the saddle. When he mounted behind her, she felt the heat of him steady, unwavering, as he took the reins. Voices swelled behind them. "Hurry," Calder murmured. "Mountain'll swallow our tracks if we reach the tree line." Ilara swallowed, tasting fear and something else, something like hope. They rode out the back of Red Hollow, the horses' hooves crunching through fresh snow. Lanterns flickered behind them, the town shrinking into a smear of orange and gray. Somewhere deep in the woods, a crow cawed a single sharp note as if warning them that winter watched waiting. Calder leaned forward, voice close to her ear. "Hold on," he said. "You'll freeze before we hit the trees unless you do." She gripped the saddle horn with what little strength she had left. Ahead, the dark pines loomed like a wall of teeth. Behind them, the town that had tried to crush her, ringed with torches and hatred. The cold bit deeper, but the coat around her held warmth. Calder's arm braced her whenever she slumped, keeping her from falling. And as they crossed into the tree line, into the shadows of the mountain, she realized she wasn't thinking of the chair anymore. She was thinking of the man who had torn her from it. The man who lived where winter swallowed secrets. The man the town feared. The man she would soon have to trust with her life. And as the horse climbed the frozen trail, Ilara sensed without knowing why that reaching his cabin was only the beginning. Because men like Calder Rourke didn't save someone unless the mountain had a plan for both of them. And the mountain never took kindness lightly. Snow pressed in from every side as the horse climbed higher, the wind dragging pine scent and cold like blades across Ilara's face. Her hands buried in Calder's coat barely felt the saddle horn anymore. Her body ached, but it was a quiet ache dulled by shock and exhaustion. She didn't dare look back. She knew what waited there, torches, a noose, and the kind of hate that grew from small men pretending to be giants. Calder hadn't spoken since they left Red Hollow behind. He guided the horse with a sure hand, body still as stone behind her, except for the slight shifts in balance as they crested the rise and dropped into a narrow ravine. Snow muffled everything, even the creak of leather and clink of the rifle tied to his saddle. When they finally reached a crooked trail shadowed by firs, Heavy with ice, he pulled the reins gently. "We'll dismount here," he said. Ilara's knees trembled when her boots hit the ground. The cold rushed back in like it had been waiting for her weight to return. She swayed. Calder caught her elbow again, steady as always. "Cabin's not far," he said, "but horse can't take this slope. We walk from here." She nodded, teeth clenched. She wouldn't be a burden. Not now. They moved through the trees in silence, boots crunching the snow crust. The trail narrowed, hemmed in by outcroppings of granite and bramble. Wind moved through the branches in long, moaning sighs. Ilara glanced up. "Is it always this quiet up here?" Calder didn't look back. "It's quieter than most folks can stand. But it's honest." They rounded a bend, and suddenly the cabin was there, set low beneath a thick roof of snow smoke trailing from a narrow chimney. The porch was sunken in places, the railing missing on one side. But the windows held light, warm, golden flickering. Ilara exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He opened the door with a shoulder and stepped aside for her. She crossed the threshold into a world of heat and wood smoke. The cabin was a single room, walls paneled with rough pine shelves lined with dried herbs, tin cups and leather-bound books. A thick bearskin rug stretched near the hearth. A battered cot stood in the far corner, layered in wool. "Sit by the fire," Calder said, closing the door behind him. "You'll feel your fingers again soon." She sat knees close to the flames and tried to peel the frozen leather from her feet. Calder knelt beside her and helped pulling off her boots one at a time. Her socks were soaked. Her toes were red and near numb. He stood and tossed them near the hearth. "You're not frostbitten. Just close." She stared at the fire, blinking hard. "You didn't have to help me," she said finally. "You could have kept riding." "I could have," he said. "Then why?" He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Because sometimes the mountain keeps secrets better than men ever could." She frowned. "That's supposed to mean something." He didn't answer, and somehow it told her more than a speech would have. A kettle hung over the flames, already starting to steam. He fetched a tin cup and filled it halfway, added a splash from a bottle on the shelf. "Pine needle tea," he said, handing it to her. "And a drop of whiskey. Won't taste good, but it'll warm your chest." She sipped and coughed hard. "God, you drink this willingly when it's this or a coffin, yeah." The fire settled into a slow crackle. The storm outside pressed against the windows, but didn't get in. The silence wasn't empty here. It felt full of things unsaid, of memories not spoken aloud. She looked around the cabin. A small desk sat in the corner. A hunting bow hung near the door. Everything had its place. Nothing was wasted. "You live here all winter?" she asked. "I live here all year. No family." "Not anymore." She wanted to ask what that meant, but the tightness around his mouth made her think better of it. Some things had to be earned. Her hands still shook when she handed back the tin. "I was halfway gone in that square." "You were still breathing." "That didn't mean I was still living." He gave her a long look. "You made it out." "That's more than most." Silence again, deeper now. The flames popped. Somewhere outside, a tree groaned under the weight of ice. She broke the quiet. "You ever miss town?" He shook his head. "I miss decent coffee. Not people. Even when it's just you and the wind for weeks." His voice softened just slightly. "The wind doesn't lie to me." She looked into the fire, watching the light flicker against her raw wrists. "You think they'll come looking? They're angry. Makes men stupid." but the snow'll slow them down. She nodded, though the knot in her stomach didn't ease. Calder turned back to the hearth and added a log. You'll sleep in the cot. I'll take the floor. I don't want to take your bed. He glanced back. It's not about want. It's about need. His logic was a wall she couldn't climb. She stood slowly, testing her legs. Thank you. For today. You don't owe me thanks. I know. I'm giving it anyway. That earned her the faintest twitch of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Something close. He moved to the door and checked the latch. Outside, snow fell harder now, fat flakes spinning in the wind like lost prayers. Calder peered through a narrow gap in the wood. They'll try again, he said. But this cabin's old stone and stubborn. Like me. She pulled the coat tighter around her. How long do you think I have? He didn't look at her. Long enough to figure out who you want to be when no one's watching. Her heart skipped. She turned that over in her mind, the idea that maybe, just maybe, survival could be something more than hiding. She moved toward the cot and lay down the wool rough but dry beneath her. The warmth from the fire licked her back. Calder sat by the window rifle in his lap, watching the storm come down like a curtain between them and the world. She closed her eyes. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, it was quiet, heavy, safe for now. But she knew this was only a beginning. A pause between tempests. And the man keeping watch wasn't just a rescuer. He was hiding something, too. Something old and jagged behind those gray eyes. She didn't know what. But she intended to find out. Because no one saved a girl like her without reason. And Calder Rourke wasn't the kind of man who acted without one. Morning broke soft and gray. A thin line of light crept across the cabin floor, slicing between the shutters and landing on Alara's face. She stirred beneath the wool blanket, unsure for a moment where she was. The memory hit her in pieces, wooden chair freezing cold, the jeering voices, then Calder's coat, his voice like a knife cutting through the chaos. She sat up slowly, the fire beside her now, just a cradle of glowing coals. Across the room, Calder stood at the small table near the stove, methodically slicing dried meat. His movements were efficient, quiet, like a man who had done the same thing every morning for years. Her body ached, but it was no longer the sharp sting of fear. It was the dull heaviness that followed survival. He glanced over his shoulder. You hungry? She hesitated. A little. He handed her a small wooden bowl with pieces of venison and leftover bread, dry but edible. She took it with murmured thanks and sat cross-legged on the cot. For a while neither spoke. The only sound was the occasional snap from the hearth and the wind curling around the cabin walls like a slow exhale. Then Calder said, You'll want to rest today. Let your hands heal. She nodded, swallowing a bite with effort. They still sting, but it's better. He crossed to the corner and dropped more logs into the stove. Snow's piling deep. That trail we came up won't be passable by nightfall. Alara looked toward the small, frosted window. The outside world felt distant, like a place she had almost died in, now shut out by rough pine and silence. I've been thinking, she said quietly. Maybe I should go by my mother's name. Calder glanced over. You don't like your own, I don't dislike it. She paused. But every time someone said, Alara Quinn, in Red Hollow, it felt like a curse, like it belonged to someone else. He waited. She looked at her bandaged wrists. I wasn't born for the town. I was born where voices don't echo back lies. Calder's eyes flickered. That sentence hung in the air between them, charged with something that went deeper than mere identity. I remember my mother, Ilara continued. Only bits. The way she made bread with pine ash when we had nothing else. The songs she used to hum when the snow came. And how she told me, people will always try to shame what they don't understand. Calder nodded slowly. Smart woman. She was Miwok. Grew up in a valley farther west. My father met her hauling freight and brought her east. Folks never forgave her for not being one of them. She gave a small, brittle laugh. And they sure never forgave me for being half of her. You speak any of her tongue? Calder asked, surprising her. She shook her head. Not enough. She tried to teach me. But after she died, I was told to forget it. That it didn't belong in a house with a white roof and a cross over the bed. Calder moved to the fire and poured 2 cups of that same bitter pine tea from the kettle. He handed one to her. They were wrong, he said. The warmth in the cup crept into her fingers. Thank you for saying that. A silence passed that wasn't uncomfortable. Calder sat by the stove and watched the flames through the iron grate. I never really told you what happened, she said softly. You don't have to. I want to. She drew in a shaky breath. That food they said I stole it was going to the pigs. A sack of meal half rotted from meltwater. The kitchen girls dumped it out back. I took maybe 2 handfuls. Calder's jaw tensed. They were ready to kill me for scraps. Just because they could. They weren't punishing a crime, Calder said. They were performing control. She blinked. Performing. He met her eyes. Justice doesn't need an audience. Spectacle does. She thought about the way the crowd had gathered. The glee on Reddick's face. The way they'd laughed when her shawl slipped. Ilara Calder said, his voice low but steady. You didn't deserve what they did. She felt her throat tighten, but she refused to let tears fall. She'd done enough crying alone in shadows. He stood. Finish your tea. I need to check the traps before the snow worsens. You can help if you're up for it. She gave him a curious look. You'd let me, he shrugged. Mountain don't care who lays the bait so long as something gets caught. She laughed quietly. I'll bundle up. It took time for her to layer on the extra shirt, the thick coat, the gloves Calder had left hanging by the door. But when she stepped outside, boots crunching into the deepening snow, she felt something strange. Not fear, not quite strength either, something in between. The cold bit hard, but the trees stood tall and unmoving. Calder led her through a narrow trail carved between towering pines and jagged boulders. The wind carried whispers across the branches. She almost thought she heard her mother's voice in them. After checking 2 empty traps, Calder stopped near a rocky outcrop and pointed. Fox tracks. Old ones. But they circled that stump. Ilara crouched, inspecting the snow. They're light. Careful. Exactly. You learn that quick. She smiled faintly. I've had to be careful my whole life. Doesn't mean you should have to keep being. She looked up at him then. His expression was unreadable, but his tone carried something close to kindness. You're not what they said you were, he added. Her breath hitched. And what am I, then, she asked. Calder bent to reset a trap. Someone still standing. They made it back to the cabin as snow began to fall harder, thicker flakes tumbling from a gray sky. By the time they reached the porch, Ilara's cheeks were flushed from wind, her muscles aching, but there was a pride blooming somewhere deep in her chest. Inside, Calder hung their wet coats near the hearth. Elara sat down, rubbing her hands together. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm thinking," she replied, "about how fast the world can flip. One day I'm on a chair waiting to die. Next day I'm out chasing fox prints." Calder nodded. "That's winter for you. Cruel and clear both." She stared into the fire. "Is it always like this up here? 1 minute peace, the next minute threat." "Sometimes," he said. "Sometimes the threat is peace makes a man remember what he lost." His eyes were on the fire, but his words felt like they landed somewhere inside her chest. They ate dried meat and boiled potatoes in silence. As night settled again and the storm thickened, Elara pulled her blanket tight and looked across the room. "You're still not telling me something," she said softly. Calder didn't look up. "I'll find out what it is," she added. "Eventually." He turned then, and something in his gaze darkened, not with anger, but with weight. "I don't hide things to keep people out," he said. "I do it so they don't drown in it." She didn't push further. Not yet. But as she laid down for the night, heart still pounding from the trail, and the truths shared, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't afraid of his secrets. She was afraid of how much she wanted to be trusted with them. And by morning someone would arrive who remembered her name and her mother's, someone who would remind her that she belonged to more than just pain. The knock came just after dawn. Not a hard pounding, not the kind meant to rattle nerves or threaten doors, but a steady rhythmic tap like someone announcing themselves to the wind more than to the people inside. Elara sat up on the cot, instantly blanket clutched to her chest. Calder, already awake and seated near the window, didn't move at first. His fingers hovered just above the rifle, resting across his lap. 3 more knocks, then silence. Elara whispered, "You expecting someone?" Calder didn't answer. He stood, walked to the door, and opened it only halfway. The woman standing outside was small but solid, wrapped in furs and feathers. Snow clung to her braids. Her eyes were sharp and brown, her face creased deep at the edges like bark weathered by wind. "Lena," Calder said. The woman smiled faintly. "You always were slow to open the door." Calder stepped aside, allowing her in with a respectful nod. She passed through without hesitation, her boots leaving small, wet prints across the floor. Elara stared. Something about this woman felt familiar, not from memory, but from blood, from echoes that hummed beneath the skin. Lena pulled off her outer coat and hung it on the wall peg. She looked around the cabin, then her gaze settled on Elara. "You're awake," she said. "Good. That means the fire worked." Elara blinked. I'm sorry. Do I know you?" Lena crossed the room, crouched in front of the hearth, and stirred the coals with a stick from the wood bin. "No. But I knew your mother." The air seemed to still. Calder didn't speak. He simply moved to the back wall and began preparing tea, giving them space. "You knew my mother," Elara said, voice thin. Lena nodded, not looking up. "I knew Maya when she still wore deer-hide skirts and sang while foraging berries. I watched her fall in love with a man who promised her the valley, but brought her to a house that swallowed her voice." Elara's throat burned. "She used to sing to me. She sang to trees, too. To the creek. She sang even after she broke." Lena looked at her eyes glinting like polished stone. "She didn't break easy." Elara tried to breathe steady. "People in Red Hollow said she couldn't finish it. Didn't want the word in her mouth. Wild Lena offered. Wrong dirty blood. She shook her head. That town doesn't know the difference between roots and rot. Lena reached into her satchel and pulled out a small leather pouch, setting it beside Alara. These are herbs. Steep them in hot water when your chest feels tight. Your mother's lungs fought the cold same way. You carry her shape, you know. Same fire around the eyes. Alara touched the pouch carefully. Why? Why are you here now? Because I saw the smoke, Lena said, and the mountain told me to follow it. That would have sounded like nonsense from anyone else, but Lena said it with a quiet certainty that made it feel like scripture. Calder set down 3 cups of pine tea and joined them at the fire. You knew she'd be here. I knew someone would. The mountain doesn't waste its warnings. They sipped in silence. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing the windows like fingertips. Lena pulled something else from her satchel, an old woven charm shaped like a spiral frayed at the edges. She made this, Lena said. Gave it to me when Alara was born. Alara reached out, hands trembling, and took it. The texture was familiar in some buried way. Her vision blurred. She used to hang one over the door, Alara whispered. Said it kept out lies. Lena smiled, but it was sad. She wasn't wrong. Most lies crawl in through open mouths, but some try the front door. Calder shifted. We think Reddick will come looking again. Lena nodded once. He will. Then we'll be ready. You won't be, she said without malice. But you'll still stand. That's the point. Alara's voice came soft. Why would he try again? I'm just one girl. You're not just anything, Lena said. You're proof they're wrong. About blood. About mercy. About what it means to survive without turning cruel. The words lodged in Alara's ribs, heavy and hot. I don't feel strong, she admitted. That's because you're still growing into the part of you that is, Lena said, leaning forward. Names aren't just what people call you, girl. They're what you survive to keep. That sentence hit like a drumbeat in her chest. Alara looked down at her hands, bandaged and raw. I thought about changing my name. You don't need to, Lena replied. You need to own it. The fire crackled. The charm in Alara's hand felt warm even though it wasn't near the flames. Lena stood. Storm's coming stronger. I'll stay in the lean-to by the creek. Come find me if you dream things you don't understand. You believe in dreams? Alara asked. I believe the mountain talks to us in the ways it can, Lena said. Sometimes it whispers through trees. Sometimes through people. She pulled her coat back on and opened the door. The snow was falling in long, slanted lines, now turning the world white again. Before she stepped out, she turned to Calder. She's not the only one the mountain sent here for a reason. Then she disappeared into the storm. Calder closed the door behind her, checking the latch with quiet fingers. Alara sat frozen for a long time, staring into the flames. You all right? Calder asked eventually. I don't know, she said honestly. That felt like someone reached inside my chest and reminded my heart how to beat. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. That night, Alara couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the charm Lena had given her. Its spiral seemed to move slightly in the firelight. She held it close to her chest. Her mother had made this, had stitched it with fingers calloused from wood smoke and winter humming a tune as she looped the thread. And now it was in her daughter's hands years later, in a cabin wrapped in snow. The wind howled louder, but Alara didn't feel afraid. She felt claimed, known, remembered. The next morning she rose before Calder moved to the hearth and started the fire herself. Her fingers fumbled, but the flame caught anyway. When he stirred and looked over, she offered a quiet smile. "Your turn to sleep in." He raised an eyebrow. "You trying to take my job?" she said, poking the fire. "Just learning how to earn the warmth." He pulled on his boots, not answering, but she caught the ghost of a smile as he turned away. Outside, the storm was thinning. The sky above the trees looked almost blue. Elara stood at the door, gripping the edge of the frame. She said Reddick would come again, she murmured. "He will," Calder said behind her. "And when he does, we won't run." She nodded. Then her hand drifted to her stomach without thinking. A flicker. A worry. A secret not yet spoken. Because the next chapter in this mountain story wasn't only about survival anymore. It was about the future. And the future had already begun growing inside her. The snow was quieter today. Not gone, not melting, but softened, as if even winter needed to breathe. Calder handed Elara a second pair of wool socks and nodded toward the door. "Trap lines'll need checking," he said. "You up for a hike?" She pulled the thick wool over her bruised ankles. More than up for it. Cabin's starting to feel too warm. Calder raised an eyebrow. "First time I've heard someone complain about heat in January." Elara gave a crooked smile. "I didn't say I didn't like it. Just that I need to move." They packed dried meat, a skin of water, and a coil of rope into a canvas satchel. Calder handed her a small hatchet. "Don't swing it unless you mean it," he said. "I don't make half decisions," she replied, sliding the loop onto her belt. They set off into the trees, boots crunching on crusted snow. The sky above was the color of steel, flat and unbroken. Every sound carried far the groan of a distant tree, the click of ice shifting under branches. Calder walked a step ahead, clearing low-hanging limbs with his gloved hands. Elara followed, watching the careful way he moved through the woods. He stepped like a man who'd learned to make peace with silence. "You always walk like that?" she asked after a mile. "Like what? Like the ground might bite back." He glanced at her. "Used to tracking things that don't want to be found. Makes you respectful." She nodded, then added, "Used to being hunted makes you that way too." He didn't speak after that for a while. The first trap was empty bait, untouched snow drifted up against the line. The second held a rabbit, its small body stiff with cold. Calder reset it silently, handing Elara the carcass. "Meat's still good," he said. "We'll boil it tonight." As they pressed deeper into the forest, the ground tilted upward trail narrowing along a ridge that overlooked a frozen stream below. Elara's breath came faster with each step, but she didn't complain. Her legs burned, her gloves were damp, but something inside her liked the ache. It reminded her she was still here, still moving. They reached a stone outcropping and paused. The view stretched wide pines layered like waves, each one darker than the last, fading into fog. Calder crouched near a stump, brushing snow aside to check the final trap. Fox took the bait. Got away with it too. "Smart animal," Elara said, crouching beside him. He looked at her. "Or desperate." She tilted her head. "You think there's a difference?" Calder paused, then shook his head. "Not anymore." The wind picked up, scattering snow through the branches. Elara pulled her coat tighter. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He gave a nod. "You said before that you lost your family, your wife." He didn't look up from the trap. "I did." "Was it here?" Calder stood slowly. "Cabin was new then. I built it with my hands. Thought it could keep the world out." Ilara waited. She was 6 months along when the storm came. Blizzard hit harder than I expected. I left at first light to get medicine. Snow swallowed the trail. Took me 3 days to get back. His voice had no anger in it. Just ash. She died in that bed. Alone. Ilara felt her chest crack open, slow and silent. "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded. I was too. They stood there for a long moment, the weight of loss pressing between them like frost. "You loved her," she said, not as a question. "I still do," he replied. "That kind of love doesn't vanish. It just stops moving." Ilara looked away. "I've never had anyone love me like that." Calder's gaze stayed on the trees. "Maybe you just haven't been seen right." She blinked. "What does that mean?" "Some ghosts die," he said quietly. "Others wear your skin and answer your name." She didn't ask what he meant, not fully. Some truths weren't meant to be dissected. Some only needed to be felt. They started back, retracing their steps along the ridge. About halfway down, Ilara slipped. Her boot hit ice, and her legs went out from under her. She cried out as she slid toward the edge. Calder moved fast. Too fast for a man his size. He dropped to one knee and caught her coat just before her legs went over. For a second, they both froze, her breathing ragged, his grip steel. Then he pulled her up slowly, carefully, until she was standing again. Her hands clutched his coat. "I thought I was gone." "I wouldn't let that happen," he said. "You say that like it's a choice." "It is." He didn't let go until her feet were solid beneath her again. They didn't talk for a while after that. Snow began to fall again, gentle but insistent, frosting their shoulders and hats. By the time they reached the cabin, the wind had picked up again. Calder started the fire while Ilara hung their coats and boiled water. Her fingers shook as she worked. When they finally sat across from each other at the small wooden table, Calder spoke first. "You didn't panic." "I did," she admitted. "I just didn't have time to show it." He gave a small grunt. "That matters." "What, hiding it?" "No. Facing it." She stirred the pot absently. "You always know what to say." He looked at her, then straight on. "No. Just know what not to." That night, after the stew had been eaten and the fire had burned down to low golden light, Ilara stood near the door, holding the charm Lena had given her. She didn't look at Calder when she spoke. "I think I need to tell you something." He waited. "I haven't bled in 2 moons, she said quietly, "and I've been sick in the mornings." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. She finally turned to him. It wasn't from some man in Red Hollow. Not that kind of story. "I didn't ask," he replied. She stepped closer. "You think less of me?" He looked up. "No. I think the town already took more than it had any right to. You're allowed to keep what it couldn't." Her throat tightened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you." He leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes on the fire. "You don't have to thank me for not judging. That's the bare minimum. But it's more than I've had in a long time." They sat there in the hush wind rattling the shutters. Neither of them knew it yet, but someone else was already riding up the ridge. And his name had once meant loyalty, but now meant betrayal. The sound came just before dawn, hooves crunching slow and deliberate through ice-encrusted snow. Calder was already awake. He'd been sitting by the fire since midnight, sharpening the same blade he'd sharpened 100 times before, eyes not on the steel, but on the silence. He rose quietly, pulled his coat on without a word, and reached for the rifle beside the door. Ilara stirred on the cot. "What is it?" "Someone's coming," he said, voice low. She sat up fast, reaching for her boots. "Reddick, no. Only one rider. Reddick would bring a mob." Calder stepped outside the cold, slapping his skin like a familiar enemy. The wind had picked up again, scattering snow across the clearing. Through the trees, a shape emerged. A man on horseback, wrapped in a worn brown duster rifle strapped to his back. The rider dismounted slowly, hands visible, careful not to startle. Calder squinted through the falling snow. Recognition hit like a punch to the chest. "Ray!" The man grinned beneath his beard. "Still got your eyes, old friend." Calder didn't smile. "You're a long way from Santa Rosa." Ray nodded, patting the horse. "Wasn't sure I'd find you. But then again, you always did leave a trail, even when you didn't mean to." Behind Calder, the door creaked open. Ilara stepped out, coat clutched tight, eyes wary. Ray turned. His expression flickered. "Well now, I wasn't expecting company." Calder didn't move. "She's not company. She's under my roof." Ray raised his hands. "Didn't mean anything by it. Just surprised." Ilara's fingers dug into the edge of the doorframe. "Who is he, Ray Harlan?" Calder said. "We used to wear the same badge." "That was a long time ago," Ray added. "Back when we thought law meant something." Calder kept his tone even. "You didn't ride all this way just to catch up." Ray's jaw tightened. "No. I came because your name's been whispered in Red Hollow. Reddick's got a price on your head now, Calder. You and hers." Ilara stepped closer. "Why mine?" Ray looked at her not unkindly. "Because you lived when he told folks you'd die. And now that story's spreadin'. He can't have that." She blinked. "So you came here to bring us back?" Ray shook his head. "I came to warn you. And to offer something." Calder didn't move, but the tension in his shoulders deepened. "Say it." "There's a man 2 valleys over, Elias Trent. Used to run mail routes, now he's got his own patch of land. Remote safe. You could disappear there. Both of you." Ilara's pulse quickened. "You're offering us exile, I'm offering you a chance," Ray said. "Before it turns into a hunt." Calder's voice dropped. "You rode 2 days through a snowstorm to offer a favor." Ray looked at him long. "I owed you one." The air between them thickened, heavy with old wounds. Ilara stepped back inside, her mind spinning. Calder followed a moment later. He set the rifle down but didn't sit. "You trust him?" she asked. "I used to." "That's not an answer." Calder sighed. "Ray's not a bad man. But good men do bad things when they think it's justified." She moved to the window. Ray stood near his horse, adjusting the saddle, not rushing. "He seemed sincere," she said quietly. "Ray always does." The rest of the day passed slow, brittle as ice. Ray didn't leave. He pitched a small tent near the edge of the clearing, refusing to come inside. Calder didn't press him. Neither did Ilara. Something unspoken passed between the two men, an understanding carved from years of standing on opposite sides of a badge. That night, Calder took first watch. He sat near the fire hat, low over his eyes, rifle resting across his knees. Ilara lay on the cot, restless eyes wide open. "Did you ever—" She started, then paused. He looked over. "Go ahead." "Did you ever think about what might have happened if you'd stayed a lawman?" Calder leaned back in the chair. "Sometimes. Mostly when I can't sleep. And then I remember the last badge I buried. Ilara didn't ask whose badge it was. I think Ray still wants to believe in law, Calder said. Wants to believe there's still rules that hold. She nodded slowly. But the ones in Red Hollow only hold if you're holding the whip. They sat in silence for a while. Then Calder said almost to himself, the law don't protect people like you. It was built to forget you. Ilara swallowed hard. So what do we do? Calder stood. We decide if we're runnin' or standin'. The next morning, Ray broke camp. Ilara stood on the porch watching him cinch the saddle. Calder handed him a flask. You're not going to change your mind, Ray asked. Calder shook his head. We've got roots here now, even if they're shallow. Ray sighed. Then I'll ride to Trent, tell him to expect no one. He mounted the horse and tipped his hat. Take care of her. I will, Calder said. Ray paused, then added, and be ready. Reddick's not patient. Then he rode out, vanishing into the trees like a ghost that had never belonged to one place. Ilara watched him go. He doesn't seem like a liar. He's not, Calder said. But he also doesn't know how to stay. She turned toward him. Do you? He met her gaze. I'm learning. That night, the snow began again, heavier than before. And far below the ridge, in the warmth of a Red Hollow saloon, Mayor Reddick poured 2 fingers of whiskey and handed it to a rider with a scar across his left eye. You find him yet? Reddick asked. The rider drank slow. Found someone who did. And he's holed up, but not alone. Girl's still with him. Reddick's smile was thin as the blade he kept beneath the table. Good, he said. Let him teach her how to fight. He raised his glass. We'll see if he can teach her how to bleed. Up on the mountain, the storm raged, and Ilara Quinn stood barefoot on the wooden floor, hand resting on her stomach, whispering a promise to the life growing inside her. You won't be born afraid. Not like I was. Tomorrow she would ask Calder to teach her how to shoot. The morning air bit sharper than usual, cold, slicing through layers like it had a score to settle. Calder stood behind the cabin arms, crossed, staring at the line of tin cans he'd placed atop the split-rail fence. His breath steamed in the quiet. Snow crunched behind him as Ilara approached, rifle slung awkwardly over her shoulder. She stopped a few feet away, adjusting the strap that cut across her chest. You said you'd teach me. He nodded. I did. You ready? About as ready as I'll ever be. He studied her a moment, then took the rifle from her hands. This is a Winchester. Not light, but steady. She won't forgive you for being sloppy. Sounds familiar. A ghost of a smirk tugged at his mouth. You want to hit something. First, stop thinking about hitting it. Think about why you don't want to miss. He loaded a round, then held the rifle out to her. She took it, hands trembling just a little. Calder stepped behind her. Not too close, but close enough to adjust her shoulders. Widen your stance. Knees soft. Don't lock them. She obeyed. Now breathe, he said. In slow. Out slower. Ilara leveled the rifle at the far can. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. It wasn't just a target. It was Red Hollow. It was Reddick. It was every sideways glance, every whispered name, every man who'd looked her up and down like she was nothing but meat to hang. She fired. The rifle kicked hard into her shoulder, but the can flew clean off the rail. Her jaw dropped. I hit it. Calder gave a nod. Damn right you did. She turned to him, face flushed. I didn't think I would. That's the first lie most folks believe, he said. that they're not capable. She lined up again. Fired. Missed. He didn't comment, just waited. She set her jaw and shot again. Hit. They worked through the rest of the can line in silence. By the time the last one toppled, her arms ached, her eyes stung from the wind, and her shoulder throbbed. But she felt more alive than she had in weeks. They sat on a log near the tree line afterward, sharing jerky and sips of snowmelt from a leather flask. "You always been a good shot?" she asked. "I wasn't bad," Calder replied. "But I got better when it stopped being about pride and started being about survival." She turned toward him. "Is that what this is now, survival?" "No." He looked at her carefully. "This is preparation. Survival is when you're already too close to losing." She nodded slowly. "I don't want to live on the edge of losing anymore." "You don't have to." There was a quiet in the woods that didn't feel empty, like even the trees were listening. Later that afternoon, Calder brought out his revolver and showed her how to check the chamber, how to reload, how to clear a jam. She mimicked each movement until it was muscle memory, until the gun no longer felt foreign in her hands. At dusk, they stood together in front of the cabin, watching clouds roll over the mountains. "You've changed," Calder said quietly. Ilara raised an eyebrow. "In the 3 days I've been here, in the way you carry your eyes, in the way you don't flinch when the wind shifts." She didn't answer right away. Then slowly she said, "You ever feel like the person you used to be died, but you still walk around in their skin?" Calder nodded. "Every damn day." She looked down at her hands. "Maybe that's what healing is. Letting the new person grow without killing the old one completely." He looked at her then, not with pity, not with awe, with recognition. "You're not just trying to survive anymore," he said. "You're starting to stake a claim." She smiled a little. "You mean like land? I mean like identity, like space in the world." That night, Ilara cleaned the rifle herself. Calder didn't offer help, just watched from the corner of the cabin, whittling a stick with a worn hunting knife. The fire crackled between them. As she worked the cloth down the barrel, she said, "When Reddick comes, I want him to see me standing." "You will," Calder said. "No, I mean standing. Not hiding behind you. Not ducking behind a door." He set the knife down. "You think I'd let you do it alone? I think I need to," she said. "Not to prove something, but to end something." He considered that, then nodded once. "You ever wonder if he's scared?" she asked. "Of how fast I disappeared, of what it might mean if I come back?" "Oh, he's scared," Calder said. "But not in the way cowards are scared. In the way men are when they sense their grip on power slipping." Ilara set the rifle down, her fingers tracing the worn wood of the stock. "I don't want revenge," she said. "I know, I want to matter." Calder met her gaze. "Then don't shoot to kill. Shoot to reclaim." The words landed like iron against her ribs. She slept lightly that night, half listening to the wind, to the creak of snow on the roof. Around midnight, she woke with a start, certain she'd heard something outside. She crept to the window, careful not to wake Calder, and peeled the curtain back. 2 dark figures on horseback stood at the edge of the tree line, watching. She froze. One of them raised a lantern, just a flicker of yellow in the black. Then they turned and disappeared into the woods. She stood there for a long time, hand pressed to the glass. She didn't scream. She didn't wake Calder. She went back to bed. And when morning came, she stepped outside with the rifle strapped to her back, stared into the pines, and whispered, "I don't fear being hunted. I fear going back to who I was." The war hadn't come yet, But it was close, and she was no longer the girl waiting to be saved. She was the woman waiting to defend something worth dying for. The snow had stopped falling, but it wasn't calm. It was the kind of still that came just before something broke the hush between inhale and gunfire. The forest stood quiet that morning, too quiet like it was holding its breath. Calder didn't say much when Alara told him what she saw the night before. Just nodded once, jaw locked, then checked the ammunition in both rifles and laid them out on the table like tools in a surgeon's tray. "You think it was a warning?" she asked, pulling her coat tight as she watched him work. "No," he said. "If they wanted you dead, they'd have stayed." "Then why show themselves?" Calder looked up. "Because it's not about killing. It's about pressure. Reddick wants you nervous, wants you paranoid. He wants to weaken you before he ever lifts a finger." Alara crossed her arms, her gaze hardening. "Then let him know I'm not made of glass." Calder's voice was quiet but firm. "You're not. But you're still flesh. And flesh can be broken if we don't think smart." The rest of the day was spent reinforcing. Calder taught her how to set traps at the tree line, how to disguise snares under the snow, how to line broken branches with sharpened stakes. They moved with purpose, checking the perimeter, leaving no trail untouched. "You ever kill a man up close?" Alara asked, crouching beside a snare as she tied a knot. Calder didn't answer for a moment. Then, "Yes." "What did it feel like?" He stood slowly. "Permanent." Alara sat back on her heels, watching his face. "You regret it." "I regret what made it necessary," he said. "But not the pull of the trigger." She nodded. "Good. I want you to teach me that part too." He looked down at her. "The part where you kill, Lo," she said. "The part where you don't flinch after." They worked until dusk. When they returned to the cabin, their boots-soaked hands raw from cold, there was a figure waiting on the porch. Lena. She stood wrapped in her heavy furs, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You felt them too?" she asked Alara without greeting. Alara blinked. "You mean the riders? I mean the threat." Alara nodded once. "Yeah, last night." Lena stepped forward. "Then it's time you knew something." Inside the cabin, she unwrapped her satchel and pulled out a folded cloth. Inside was a small hand-carved pendant in the shape of a hawk's claw. She handed it to Alara. "This belonged to your mother," Lena said. "She never wore it after she married, but she kept it near her heart. It's Miwok, a sign of vengeance but also rebirth." Alara turned the pendant over in her fingers. "Why now?" "Because your story's about to split," Lena said. "The old part dies here, but the new one needs something to anchor it." Alara met her eyes. "What if I don't want to be the one who carries revenge?" Lena's voice softened. "Then carry protection. Not for you, for what you're growing inside." Alara touched her stomach. She hadn't spoken of the child again since that night, but now it rose in her throat like fire. Calder stood by the fire silent, watching, listening. Lena looked between them. "You're not just facing bullets, Alara. You're facing erasure. They don't want your body gone. They want your name forgotten." That night, sleep came in patches. Calder took the cot near the door. Lena curled under a quilt in the far corner. Alara lay awake, fingers pressed around the hawk's claw, listening to the night. Around midnight, she heard a branch snap. She was on her feet in seconds, rifle already in hand. Calder met her eyes across the room. No words, just a nod. They moved together. Outside, the moon hung low and bruised. Wind scraped through the trees. The shadows looked wrong, stretched thin like they didn't belong. Calder held up a hand. Ilara froze. Then came a voice. Calder. A single word, slow and taunting. Calder's whole body stiffened. That's Silas, he whispered. Who is he? Ilara asked. The man I used to call my brother. Another voice followed, sharp, amused. And the girl? She's with you now. Ilara gripped the rifle tighter. Why are they waiting? Because they want to draw us out. Make us shoot first. Lena stepped forward from the darkness of the porch, eyes glowing with purpose. Then don't give them what they want. The silence held for a breath, then another, then a third. Then a gunshot rang out not toward them, but into the sky. A message. Calder's voice was low. Next time it won't be a warning. Ilara stared into the trees, jaw clenched. If they want to haunt these woods, they better learn we ain't the ones afraid of ghosts. The men were gone by morning, their tracks just faint lines disappearing into the ridge. Lena left before breakfast, her goodbye brief. You know where to find me. Ilara stood at the edge of the porch, watching her fade into the trees. Calder came up beside her, coffee in hand. You believe in omens? She asked. I believe in preparation. What about luck? I believe in loaded dice. She turned to him. They're not backing off, are they? No. They're circling. She nodded. Then it's time to decide how this ends. Calder studied her. You already have, haven't you? She didn't answer, but the fire in her eyes said yes. Below the ridge, Reddick read the report from Silas without blinking. He poured another drink, hands steady. 2 more days, he said to the mirror. Then I burn that mountain down to ash. The clock was ticking, and the mountain was sharpening its teeth. The storm returned on the 3rd night, not as snow, but as wind, sharp and fast, like blades against bark. The kind of wind that made trees moan and roofs whisper threats. Calder stood near the window, watching the darkness churn. His rifle leaned against the wall, already cleaned, loaded, and within reach. Ilara sat by the fire, polishing the revolver he'd given her, her movements slow but sure. Tomorrow, she said, her voice low, steady. Calder didn't turn around. Tomorrow. They had known this was coming. Every broken twig at the edge of the woods, every distant howl, every flicker of movement in the dark, it had all pointed to this. The real thing. The collision. I dreamed of fire last night, Ilara said, setting the gun down. Not the kind that warms, the kind that takes everything. Calder looked at her, now eyes unreadable. Dreams know things we don't say out loud. She nodded. In the dream, I was holding the baby. But when I looked down, my arms were full of ashes. The wind howled against the shutters like it was listening. I'm scared, she admitted. That means you're sane. But I'm not backing down. Calder walked over and crouched beside her. You don't have to win to mean something. You just have to stand. She looked at him, lips trembling. What if standing costs everything? His hand found hers. Then we leave a mark deep enough they never forget we were here. She clutched his hand tighter. We were never supposed to survive. People like us. No, Calder said we were supposed to disappear. But we didn't. And that's why they're coming. They both stood when they heard the first howl, real this time, not wind. A call low and rising from the woods. Then another, and another. Calder grabbed his coat and rifle. They're testing our nerve. How many you think? Alara asked. Too many. She didn't flinch. Let them come. By morning, the wind had died, but the trees stood tense, leaning like they were bracing for impact. Calder and Alara finished boarding the windows, stacking logs near the door as makeshift cover. Every sound outside became a question. Do we still have the oil? Alara asked. Calder nodded. 2 jars left. Enough for a wall of flame if we need it. She pulled a rag from her coat pocket. Then I'll make the torches. Midday came without a shot fired, but tension hung heavier than the clouds. Lena arrived just before dusk, her bow slung over her shoulder, eyes hard as winter iron. They're waiting until night, she said simply. Calder gestured for her to come inside. Then we'll be ready. Inside the cabin, Alara laid out what weapons they had, 1 Winchester, Calder's revolver, her own pistol, a hunting knife, Lena's bow, and a hatchet. Not much, but enough to hurt anyone foolish enough to think they were soft. You sure about this? Lena asked her quietly. You could still run. Get to the ravine, double back through the south trail. Alara didn't answer right away. She looked at the door, the edges of the room, the fire that had become her heartbeat. No, she said. If I run now, I teach my child that fear is inherited. I'm not passing that down. Lena gave a single nod. Then I'll fight beside you. Night fell heavy and fast, the kind of dark that swallowed sound and made breath feel louder than footsteps. They waited in silence. Then came the snap of a branch. Then another. Alara's heartbeat quickened. She took her place behind the low barricade gun aimed at the clearing. Calder crouched near the window, scanning the tree line. Lana stood near the back arrow notched. Silence. Then Alara Quinn, a voice bellowed through the trees. Come out and face judgment. She didn't move. You think hiding in the woods makes you pure. You think you can erase what you are. Another voice followed, quieter, crueler. You were born to be broken. Come on out and finish the story, Alara whispered. That voice. Calder tensed. Silas. She took a slow breath, then louder so the woods could hear. You want the end of the story? Then come write it in blood. For a moment there was silence again. Then hell broke loose. Gunshots rang out from the trees. Bullets splintered wood, cracked windows. Calder returned fire, calculated and fast. Alara ducked, then rose to fire through a break in the wall. One figure charged through the clearing too fast, too bold. Lena's arrow caught him in the chest mid-run. He dropped like stone. Another man came around the side. Calder met him at the door, gun to his chest before he could aim. Boom. The man fell back, red soaking the snow. Alara moved like someone who'd done this before, though she hadn't. She wasn't thinking, just reacting, protecting. A bullet grazed her arm, slicing fabric and skin. She didn't scream. She fired back, heard a shout from the trees. Lena let off another arrow, then ducked to reload. Calder shouted, 5 down, more coming. Alara grabbed one of the oil jars and lit a rag. Cover me, Calder laid down 2 shots as Alara stepped into the open and hurled the jar toward the tree line. It hit a pine trunk and burst into flame, lighting the dark like a lantern from hell. Men scattered. Alara ducked back inside, chest heaving. Nice throw, Calder said. Didn't throw it for compliments, she muttered. The fire spread quick, eating up brush and dry twigs. Shadows danced in the clearing, and the men hesitated. One voice barked orders. Then came a sound they hadn't expected. Retreat. Footsteps pulling back. Snarls. Rage. And silence again. Minutes passed like hours. Then Calder opened the door slowly. No gunshots followed. No figures waited. Just firelight on snow. They were gone. For now. Lena picked up her arrows. They'll regroup. Try again. Ilara nodded, wiping blood from her arm. Let them. Calder looked at her, then at the empty clearing. You fought like someone who's done it before. I fought like someone who has something to lose, she said. And then she added more quietly. For the first time in my life, I fought like I belonged to something worth bleeding for. They buried the two bodies in the woods, said nothing over the graves, and that night the mountain didn't howl. It listened. The next morning was painted in smoke. Thin gray wisps curled above the treetops, where Ilara's firebomb had scorched a wide swath of the forest's edge. The snow had blackened. Trees stood half-burnt and crooked like wounded sentries. Ash drifted down soft as feathers. Calder crouched at the edge of the clearing, sifting through footprints, some fresh, some dragged. His jaw tightened. They pulled the bodies during the night, he said. Didn't leave them for the animals. Ilara stood behind him, rifle slung across her back, arm wrapped in a fresh bandage. Out of respect, no. Out of fear, Calder replied. Reddick wants to bury the evidence that you stood your ground. She looked at the scorched earth, her breath fogging. He's not going to stop. No, but he's going to get sloppy. They walked the perimeter again. Lena followed 10 paces behind, saying little. Her arrows were already cleaned and restrung. No wasted motion. No hesitation. Near the south ridge, Calder spotted something half buried under snow and ash. He brushed the snow away and held it up, Reddick's family crest etched on a silver coin. A calling card. He sent Silas with his blessing, Calder muttered. This wasn't rogue. This was ordered. Ilara's hands clenched. Then it's not just murder, it's war. They returned to the cabin and gathered around the fire. Calder laid the coin on the table. The flame caught its surface, making the insignia gleam. Ilara stared at it. What do we do now? We take the fight to him, Lena said. Calder looked up. You sure? Lena's eyes narrowed. He came into our woods. He spilled blood on our land. He dragged our silence into his war. We don't wait for him to return, we end it on our terms. Ilara's voice was steady. Red Hollow. Calder nodded. Red Hollow. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Calder mapped a route that would take them down the ridge, through the back canyons, avoiding the patrol roads Reddick's men likely watched. Ilara practiced daily, tightening her aim, learning how to move quiet, how to vanish behind trees. Lena taught her how to listen not just for sound, but for intent. You don't track men like you track animals, Lena said, crouched in the snow beside her. You track what they want. Men make noise when they think they're near what they desire. Ilara thought about that all night. On the third morning, they left the cabin. Calder locked the door behind them, even though they all knew locks meant little against fire and vengeance. They rode in silence until sunset, stopping in a dry creek bed to rest the horses and eat. The sky burned pink, bleeding orange and gold across the horizon. That's when Ray found them. He rode in from the north trail, alone, dust and travel on his coat, his horse frothing at the mouth. Calder stood the second he spotted him. Ray dismounted, staggering slightly. They know you're coming. Calder stepped forward. How? I don't know, Ray said, breathing hard. But Silas made it back alive. Battered, but alive. Ilara felt her stomach turn. We should have finished him. You did more than most ever managed, Ray replied. But now Reddix pulled everyone back into Red Hollow, turned it into a fortress. Lena's tone was flat. Good. Then we won't miss. Ray's eyes flicked to her. You're all serious about this, Alara stepped forward. You think we came this far just to turn around? He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. I might be able to help. Said. I've still got friends inside. Ones who don't love what Reddix done to the place. Calder narrowed his eyes. How many? 2? Maybe 3. Then we use them. They camped that night under a half-dead pine fire, low weapons within reach. Alara sat across from Ray. Why'd you come back? Ray looked down at the dirt. Because I watched that town rot from the inside and I did nothing. Figured it was too far gone to save. But you... He looked up. You lit a fire under it. Calder stirred the coals. It was already burning. She just gave it a name. They set out before dawn. Red Hollow revealed itself slowly, first as a thin trail of chimney smoke, then as rooftops, then the tall frame of the church that sat like a crown above the town. They stopped at the overlook, studying the layout. Calder pointed toward the saloon. That's where he holds his meetings. Ray nodded. He'll be there around dusk. Drinks first, then business. Alara scanned the streets. Armed men, patrols. But nothing she hadn't stared down before. Too many guards to go in loud, she said. Then we don't go in loud. Calder replied. They waited in the ravine outside town as Ray rode ahead to make contact. The sun sank lower and shadows grew longer. Alara sat beside Calder, her hand resting on the stock of her pistol. You ready? He asked. She didn't look at him. I was born ready. I just didn't know what for. He gave a low grunt of approval. Then he said more softly, whatever happens, don't forget, we're not just fighting to destroy him. We're fighting to remember who we were before he made us forget. She looked at him. I haven't forgotten, she said. I just stopped apologizing for it. When Ray returned, his face was tight. There's an opening, he said. One of the guards will step away during the shift change near the church alley. That's your path in. Calder nodded. You sure? Ray locked eyes with him. He owes me more than his life. He'll come through. They moved at twilight, sticking to shadows. As they slipped through the alleyway toward the back of the saloon, Alara could feel the blood pounding in her ears. Her breath slowed. Her hands stayed steady. She wasn't the same girl who ran from this place. And Red Hollow was about to learn why. The alley behind the saloon reeked of smoke and spilt whiskey. Alara crouched low beneath a broken window, listening to the hum of men laughing inside. Her breath clouded the glass as she tried to steady herself, hands curled tight around the pistol in her coat. Footsteps echoed up the alley. Ray appeared from the side door, his silhouette outlined by the dim lamplight. He raised 2 fingers, a signal. One guard had moved. The back room was open. Calder gave Alara a nod, then slipped in first, pistol drawn low, silent as smoke. She followed Lena at the rear arrow, ready on the string. Inside the saloon pulsed with light and warmth. Music from an out-of-tune piano filtered through swinging doors. The air stank of tobacco gun oil and sweat. Laughter. The clink of glasses. Just another night in Red Hollow. But the corner office upstairs, the one behind the frosted glass, held the real power. Calder led the way to the stairwell, boots muffled by the worn carpet. Halfway up, they paused. A voice drifted down. Let her walk in if she's dumb enough. I want to see her eyes when she realizes she never left. It was Reddick. Ilara's jaw tightened. She glanced at Calder. No words passed between them. She didn't need permission. She didn't need to be told. This was hers. At the top of the stairs, they met no resistance. Ray's contact had kept his word. One guard sat slumped near the office door, unconscious, bottle on the floor. Ilara stepped over him and placed her hand on the doorknob. Then she whispered more to herself than anyone. This isn't revenge. This is reclamation. She pushed the door open. Reddick sat behind a heavy oak desk, drink in one hand, revolver resting near the other. He didn't flinch when he saw her, just smiled. Well now, the little ghost walks. Calder stepped in behind her, silent as a shadow. Lena held back, covering the hallway. Ilara took 2 steps inside, boots echoing on the floorboards. Didn't think I'd come back. I knew you'd try, Reddick said calmly. You always had that stubborn little shake in your chin. But trying and succeeding ain't the same thing. She didn't answer, just moved closer. Reddick's eyes dropped to the pistol in her hand. That loaded, why don't you stand up and find out? He chuckled. You think you're the first girl to come in here shaking and wide-eyed, thinking the world owes her justice. I'm not here for justice, she said. I'm here for memory. Reddick raised an eyebrow. Memory, you took my voice, she said. Made sure everyone remembered your story and forgot mine. But I'm not just some footnote anymore. I came to remind you. He rose slowly, pushing the chair back. What exactly do you think you're reminding me of? That I never needed your permission to survive, she said. He moved fast, reaching for the gun. Calder fired first. The bullet hit the wood just beside Reddick's hand, splintering the desk. Reddick froze. I'd think carefully, Calder said coldly. We didn't come here to start a war, but we will finish one. Reddick raised both hands slowly. So what now? You shoot me in my own office, no, Ilara said. I make you confess. He laughed, actually laughed. You think anyone in this town cares what I confess to? They already sold their souls for comfort, and I gave it to them. That's where you're wrong, Ray said, stepping in behind them. They care now. Word spread. Half this town's waiting for you to slip. Reddick's smile faltered. Ilara reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded parchment. It was old, creased from years of hiding. The record of Reddick's first land grab, forged and sealed with a dead judge's stamp. She dropped it on the desk. Signed and notarized, she said. And fake as your promises. He stared at it, jaw tight. Where'd you get this? My mother kept records. So did the old preacher. You buried the bodies, but not the paper trail. You think that matters? It will when I post it in the square, she said. Right beside your old sermons about law and decency. Reddick lunged, then grabbing for the gun. This time, Ilara didn't flinch. She fired. The bullet hit his shoulder. He slammed back against the wall, groaning in shock. I said I wasn't here for revenge, she said, stepping closer, gun steady. But that doesn't mean I won't deliver justice if no one else will. Calder moved to check the wound. He'll live. Lena stepped in behind them. Good. Then he can hear them chant his name for the last time. Outside, the saloon had gone quiet. The gunshot had pierced the music, the drinking, the routine. Men were already standing, turning toward the stairwell. Ray stepped to the edge of the railing. Reddick's done, he said loudly. He forged records, killed witnesses, tried to burn a woman alive, and lied about it. Voices rose, confusion, some anger, but not everyone looked surprised. "Spread the word," Ray said. "A reckoning's here." Back in the office, Calder helped bind Reddick's arm. Alara stood by the window, staring out at the night. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt still, quiet. Something inside her had settled. Calder came beside her. "You all right?" She nodded. "It's strange. What is knowing I'm free and still angry?" "That's not strange," he said. "That's honest." Below, the people of Red Hollow were gathering, not with torches, not with fists, with questions. And questions Calder knew were the beginning of change. As they left the office, Reddick limping behind them, Alara whispered to Calder, "Let them see him bleed. Let them see we bled too." He looked at her, then down at the badge still pinned inside his coat. He unpinned it and dropped it in the snow. Outside, dawn broke, and Red Hollow, once a place of silence and shadows, began to remember its own voice. The wind that rolled through Red Hollow, in the days after Reddick's fall, wasn't cold, not anymore. It carried something new, something rare in that part of the world. The sound of breathing spaces, of conversations whispered without fear, of windows opened without dread. Snow still clung to rooftops, but the air felt different, lighter, like something had finally broken loose from beneath the weight of silence. Alara stood on the ridge just beyond the chapel, looking down at the town. Her coat fluttered in the breeze, her hand resting protectively over the slight curve of her stomach. She hadn't told many yet, just Calder, Lena, and Ray. But somehow the land seemed to know. It treated her with a new kind of reverence. Behind her, Calder approached quietly, bootsteps muffled in the soft earth. He stopped beside her, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You thinking of leaving?" he asked. She took one of the mugs, sipped, and said nothing for a long moment. "I don't know," she said finally. "Part of me still flinches when I hear boots on wood or a door swing open too fast. But another part, it wants to stay, to make something here." He nodded, his gaze following the line of smoke rising from chimneys down below. "That's how you know it's real. Healing always asks you to look backward before you can step forward." She smiled faintly. "Funny how peace feels heavier than war sometimes, because it's quieter, and you can finally hear your own thoughts again." They stood in companionable silence. In town, people had begun gathering again, not under fear, not under force, but with purpose. The old saloon now served as a temporary meeting hall, and the crooked sign that once bore Reddick's name had been pulled down. A child had painted a new one, just the word home. Lena had taken up residence near the old trading post, helping rebuild what the fire had damaged. Her arrows now hung over the doorway, not as warning, but as memory. She was no longer just the silent hunter. She was part of the fabric now. Ray had been asked to stay on as a town mediator, a job he never would have imagined himself doing. But his voice, once brushed aside, now carried weight. Not because it was loud, but because it was earned. As for Reddick, he lived. Broken, disarmed, and exposed, he'd been handed over to circuit riders from the state line. When they took him away in chains, no one threw stones. No one cheered. Red Hollow didn't need vengeance. What it needed was closure. In the days that followed, Alara found herself doing things she never imagined. Helping patch roofs, reading old books to children on the chapel steps, even learning how to plant winter greens in the thawing soil. The town slowly wrapped around her, not tightly, but willingly. One afternoon, while helping an old woman sort through salvaged jars behind the storehouse, a little girl tugged Alara's sleeve. "Are you the one who shot the bad man?" she asked, eyes wide. Ilara crouched down. "I helped stop him, yes." "Were you scared?" Ilara looked at the child and nodded. "Yes. But being scared doesn't mean you run. It just means what you're standing for is worth protecting." The girl tilted her head. "Will you protect us again?" Ilara smiled softly. "I hope I won't have to." Later that night, back in the small cabin, Calder had helped her rebuild on the edge of the woods. She sat by the fire with a blank sheet of paper before her. For weeks, she hadn't known what to write. Now she did. She wrote a letter not for the world, not for justice or vengeance or politics, but for her child. A story. The true kind. Not the kind passed down through rumor or fear, but the kind made from scars and choice. She wrote about loss, about silence, about the day she realized she wasn't a victim anymore. She wrote about standing in the dark with shaking hands and choosing to fire anyway. And she ended the letter with one simple truth. You were born not from hatred, but from defiance. And love, child, love is the loudest form of defiance I've ever known. When she folded the letter and tucked it into the drawer beside her bed, she felt something shift in her chest. Not pain, not rage, just space. Clean, quiet space where something new could grow. That night, Calder joined her at the porch, 2 mugs in hand again. He passed one over, settled into the rocking chair beside hers. "You gonna stay?" he asked again. She looked out at the moonlight on the snow. "I think I already have." He nodded. "Good. Town feels more like itself with you in it." She smiled sideways at him. "And what does that make you?" "The sheriff again." He chuckled. "Hell no. I've had enough of badges. I'm just a man, with a hammer and a good back building fences that don't keep people out anymore." She looked out at the horizon, where the dark met dawn. "This place ain't perfect," she said. "But maybe it doesn't have to be." "No," he said. "It just has to be honest." They rocked in silence for a while, letting the cold air brush against them like an old friend. In the distance, a lone coyote howled, not a warning, not a threat, just a voice in the wild saying, "I'm still here." And maybe that was enough. Because in the end, Ilara had learned something that couldn't be taught by gunpowder or pain. Peace isn't the absence of fear, it's the choice to build something anyway. And with every nail driven into wood, every meal shared, every truth spoken aloud, Red Hollow became a little more whole. Not because someone saved it, but because someone came back to remind it how to save itself.